The alarm buzzed at 4:47 a.m., just like it did every day. Jenny Millers reached over without looking, silencing it with the kind of practiced motion that came from years of repetition. The world outside her small window was still dark, the kind of heavy quiet that clung to rural Kansas mornings. She sat up slowly, letting the stiffness work its way out of her bones. The apartment above the pharmacy was always cold this time of year, even with the space heater humming in the corner. She dressed quickly, jeans, long-sleeve shirt, and the familiar faded blue apron she kept folded on the chair by her bed. The walk to Rosie's diner was short, 3 blocks past the hardware store, the church that only filled on Easter, and the empty lot where the old gas station used to be. Jenny walked with her hands in her pockets, breath fogging in the air, eyes scanning the familiar nothingness of her sleepy town. She opened the diner just before 5. The smell of yesterday's coffee still lingered faintly, mixed with the comforting scent of old vinyl and bacon grease soaked into the walls. She flicked on the lights, started a fresh pot, wiped down the counter even though it didn't need wiping. Habit more than cleanliness. The cook, Kathy, wouldn't arrive for another half hour. Until then, Jenny welcomed the silence. By 5:45, the first regulars trickled in. Harold with his crossword and thermos. Mrs. Langston, who always asked for dry toast and told the same story about her missing cat. Jenny smiled, nodded in the right places, refilled mugs before they were empty. Her hands moved without thinking, muscle memory built from 100 days just like this one. Behind the counter, the clock ticked in a steady rhythm. Jenny didn't check her phone. She rarely did in the mornings. No one was waiting on a message from her. No one to text good morning or ask how she slept. Her world began and ended here, between the booths, behind the counter, under the hum of fluorescent lights. At exactly 7 o'clock, Jenny refilled the sugar caddy on booth 3, glancing out the window as she did every day. That's when she noticed him again. The boy, small, thin, a backpack slung over one shoulder, standing across the street, just out of reach of the diner's warm glow. Shivering. She hesitated, just a moment, then turned away, hands steady as she carried coffee to table 5. The day had begun, same as always. Only, maybe not quite. It started as a flicker of movement, something easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Jenny noticed. She always did. Outside the diner's fogged-up window, framed between the bent mailbox and the lamppost that hadn't worked in years, a boy stood still as a scarecrow. His coat was too thin, his frame too small, and the backpack he carried looked like it belonged to someone twice his size. He didn't knock or come inside, just stood there, watching. Jenny paused mid-wipe of a table, eyes narrowing as she took him in. Maybe 9, 10 at the most, no hat, no gloves. Just a quiet stillness that didn't match his age. She waited to see if he'd move, maybe cross the street, maybe go to the school a few blocks down. But he didn't. He simply stood there, like he had nowhere to be and too many places to avoid. Kathy, who had just come in, followed her gaze. "You see him too?" Jenny nodded once. "He's been there a few days now. Same spot, same time." Kathy grunted, pulling on her apron. "Looks like trouble." Jenny didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because trouble didn't always wear a sign. Sometimes it looked like a boy with tired eyes and red fingers, standing just outside the warmth. The breakfast crowd came and went. Plates clinked, coffee poured, the bell above the door chimed in a steady rhythm. But every now and then, Jenny glanced out the window, half expecting the boy to be gone. He wasn't. Around 7:30, he finally crossed the street. Not in a rush, not looking around. Just slow, deliberate steps until he reached the diner's door. He opened it quietly, slipping inside like a shadow. Jenny caught a better look at him now. Dark hair that needed cutting, shoes scuffed to the point of holes, and a face that didn't quite match the weight in his eyes. He sat in the corner booth, the one farthest from the register, and pulled out a book with a cracked spine. A few seconds later, he looked up at her. Just once. Jenny walked over with a glass of water. "Here you go, sweetheart." He nodded, the gesture barely noticeable. Didn't smile, didn't speak, just returned to the pages like they were a wall he could hide behind. Jenny lingered a beat longer than she needed to, then turned back toward the counter. No questions, not yet. But she felt it, the first tug at something buried deep in her chest. Something that told her this boy, quiet and shivering, was more than just another face passing through. Something told her he'd be back tomorrow. By the end of the first week, Jenny had stopped pretending she wasn't watching him. The boy arrived each morning at exactly 7:15, just as the sun began to stretch across the diner's front windows. Always alone, always quiet. The bell above the door barely had time to chime before he slipped into his usual booth, the far corner, back pressed to the vinyl, eyes low, book already open. He never ordered anything more than a glass of water. Jenny brought it without asking. Some mornings she added a paper straw or a few extra napkins, small gestures that felt like offerings. He never acknowledged them with more than a nod. But she noticed the way he watched the room when he thought no one was looking, eyes drifting toward the other tables, lingering on the plates of eggs and toast, bacon curling under the warmth of the griddle. Hunger sat on his face like a shadow, faint but unmistakable. Jenny had seen it before, in herself, in neighbors growing up, in the mirror more times than she cared to remember. He read the same book over and over, the spine soft with wear, pages dog-eared and handled with care. Jenny tried once to catch the title, but could only make out the word Journey on the cover. It seemed fitting. The boy never spoke unless spoken to. When she refilled his water, he'd nod again, maybe say thank you so softly it barely counted. But he never lingered. At 7:55, like clockwork, he'd close the book, tuck it into his oversized backpack, and leave with the same deliberate steps he'd entered with. Jenny would watch from the window as he walked toward the school a few blocks down, head down, back slightly hunched, like he was bracing against a world that kept trying to blow him over. No one else paid much attention to him. The morning crowd talked about the usual, prices going up, the mayor's latest misstep, how cold it had gotten already. But Jenny kept a quiet tally in her mind. 15 minutes in the booth before he opened the book, 2 sips of water. One long look at the family sharing a plate of waffles and sausage. Each day, Jenny felt her curiosity press a little harder against the edges of silence. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why was he always alone? But something about the boy's posture, the way he angled his body to see the door and window at the same time, warned her. Questions would only push him further away. So she asked none. Just kept the water glass full and the seat open. Watched and waited. Some things, she thought, reveal themselves only when you stop demanding answers. The bell above the diner's door let out its usual tired chime as the boy stepped in, his shoes wet from the slush that clung to the sidewalks outside. Jenny glanced up from the coffee pot, already knowing who it was. By now, it was as routine as flipping on the open sign. 7:15, just like every other day. He didn't look around, didn't pause or hesitate. He moved straight to the corner booth, the one where the sun didn't quite reach until mid-morning, and slid into his usual seat. His backpack thumped softly against the vinyl bench, too large for his thin frame. From it he pulled the same book, its spine tired and pages curling at the edges. He opened it halfway through and stared at the words like they were instructions on how to keep breathing. Jenny approached without a word, balancing a small tray with a glass of water and a napkin. She placed it down gently, careful not to interrupt whatever invisible thread he was following through those pages. "No food today?" she asked, voice light, testing. He shook his head once, then, after a pause, added in a near whisper, "Just water." Jenny didn't push. She simply nodded and offered a soft smile before turning back toward the counter. But she kept him in her peripheral vision, watched as he sipped the water slowly, like he was making it last. Watched how he glanced up whenever a plate passed by, eyes catching on the steam rising off pancakes, the shimmer of butter sliding down toast. He never lingered long, just enough to imagine, maybe remember, maybe ache. He turned the pages slowly, but she noticed he rarely read them. His eyes drifted more than focused. It wasn't about the story. It was about the escape. The morning crowd bustled in and out, but he stayed still, a quiet presence in the middle of everyone else's noise. Jenny refilled coffees, cleared plates, scribbled orders on her notepad, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. The book, the silence, the water. By 7:55, he closed the book, slipped it back into his bag, and slid out of the booth. Jenny was at the counter when he passed, and without looking up, he said, "Thank you." It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her. Quiet, crisp, like he meant it more than anything. She didn't reply, just nodded. Watched as he pushed through the door, vanishing back into the cold morning like he was never really there at all. But he was, and Jenny knew he'd be back. On the 15th morning, Jenny stood behind the counter watching the boy stir his straw through his glass of water, ice already melted. His book lay open, spine resting against the edge of the table, though he hadn't turned a page in minutes. She noticed the way his eyes clung to a nearby plate, pancakes stacked high, butter sliding slowly down the side. His throat moved in a swallow he probably didn't know he made. Jenny turned and walked to the kitchen pass-through, where Kathy was plating a fresh order. "One extra?" Jenny asked, voice light. Kathy raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. Sometimes the cook got the orders wrong. Sometimes Jenny got creative. A few minutes later, Jenny approached the boy's booth with a plate in hand. The pancakes were golden, still steaming, dotted with a few blueberries she knew Kathy only used when they were fresh. "Oh, I'm sorry," Jenny said, setting the plate down as though it were an afterthought. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of tossing it." The boy looked up sharply, suspicion tightening his brow. His eyes flicked from the plate to her face, weighing the moment like someone twice his age. "It's okay," she said gently. "Sometimes the cook gets the orders mixed up. Better to eat it than waste it, right?" She didn't wait for an answer, just walked back toward the counter, pretending to wipe down menus that didn't need it. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched him sit motionless, then slowly, tentatively, pick up the fork. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He didn't savor it. He simply ate, quick, focused bites, as if the food might vanish if he didn't finish fast enough. By the time she returned 10 minutes later, the plate was empty, fork laid neatly across the rim. His book was open again, eyes fixed on the page with intense concentration. Too intense, Jenny thought, for someone actually reading. She reached for the plate. "Hope it was good." "Thank you," he said softly, not lifting his gaze. Jenny nodded once, collected the empty dish, and returned to the counter. She didn't need more than that. His thank you wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. Fragile and unspoken, but there. From that day on, the kitchen always had an extra ready by 7:20. From that day on, the plate was always there before the boy asked for it, though he never did. Jenny would set it down with the same practiced indifference she offered the regulars their refill of black coffee or rye toast. "Kitchen made too much again," she'd say softly, not looking for a response. He never questioned it, never asked how food could appear by mistake every morning at the exact same time. He just ate, quickly at first, like it might be taken away mid-bite, then slower, more carefully, as the days passed, and he began to trust that the meal wasn't going anywhere. Jenny never hovered. She understood the importance of silence, the way it created space where something fragile could grow. She stayed behind the counter, wiping mugs that were already clean, folding napkins twice over just to keep her hands busy. But her eyes drifted to that corner booth more than they should have. The boy never smiled, but there were signs, a loosened grip on his fork, the way his shoulders slowly sank from their usual hunch. He no longer darted glances toward the door. Instead, he let himself be still, if only for a while. "Thank you," he would say when she cleared the plate. Not every day, not loudly, just a soft whisper, offered without eye contact, like it cost him something to say it. Jenny never pushed for more. She simply nodded and whispered back, "Any time," as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Not charity, not pity, just breakfast. Others began to notice. Harold, sitting at his usual stool, gave Jenny a sideways glance one morning. "That kid yours?" "No," she said without looking up from the coffee pot. "Looks at you like you might be." She didn't answer, just walked past him with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast for Booth too. Because what could she say? That she saw herself in the boy's silence. That hunger wasn't always in the stomach, that sometimes it sat just behind the eyes, waiting for someone to see it. The boy never stayed past 7:55. He closed his book, tucked it into his too big bag, nodded once toward Jenny, and left. Always the same routine. Always that quiet thank you. And every time Jenny heard it like a promise. A small seed of trust planted in the space between two people who never needed to ask why the other showed up every day. Some mornings, that was more than enough. The first snow arrived quietly one morning, blanketing the street in a thin layer of frost that turned the sidewalks to glass. Jenny stepped around it with practiced care, boots crunching as she made her way to the diner. When she reached the door, she paused, as she always did, and glanced across the street. He was there, wrapped in the same too-thin coat, fingers buried in the sleeves. Backpack slung over one shoulder, the frayed strap patched with duct tape. She didn't wave. Neither did he. But they both knew what came next. By 7:15, he was seated at the corner booth. She placed the plate of oatmeal, brown sugar sprinkled carefully on top, without a word. A glass of water followed. He nodded once, opened his book, and began to eat. It had become something more than habit. Not quite friendship, not charity, but something quiet and mutual. A ritual, sacred in its simplicity. He never lingered, never asked for seconds, never even looked up when she passed. But Jenny didn't mind. It was their rhythm, hers to give, his to accept. A dance of routine, unsaid and unquestioned. Some mornings when the diner was slow and the only sound came from the hiss of the coffee pot and the scrape of forks against plates, she'd catch herself watching him a little too long. Wondering. Always wondering. But the questions never made it past her lips. She didn't know where he came from or where he went after school. She didn't know his name, what he dreamed about, or why he always looked like he was ready to run. But she knew how he took his eggs, scrambled, not runny. She knew he liked syrup, but never used too much. She knew he always folded his napkin into a small square before leaving. And she knew he was hungry, not just for food, but for something more. Safety, maybe. Consistency. A place where he didn't have to be anything except present. So she gave him that. And every morning, when he whispered thank you and walked out the door without looking back, Jenny felt the echo of it stay behind. A quiet presence in the booth, the book, the empty plate. The kind of presence you don't need words to explain. Some people find comfort in conversation, in shared laughter or stories told over coffee. Jenny and the boy found it in silence. And every day, that silence grew softer, warmer, almost like home. The frost had deepened, clinging to the windows in thick webs that distorted the morning light. Jenny wiped a circle clear with her sleeve as she opened up the diner, her breath fogging in the still air. Like always, she glanced across the street. Like always, he was there. Same spot, same stillness. He came in right on time, 7:15, sat down, opened his book. She served him scrambled eggs and toast that morning, warm and buttered, with a small ramekin of strawberry jam. He didn't ask for it, didn't mention if he liked it, but the way he scraped the plate clean told her everything she needed to know. By now, Jenny had memorized his patterns, the way he always tugged his sleeves down when someone got too close, how he only opened his book after the plate was in front of him, not before, how his eyes never wandered toward the television above the counter like the other kids might. They were fixed, always, on exits and corners and people's hands. He never brought friends, never came in with an adult. There were no goodbyes or good mornings shared with anyone but her. And that was when the questions began pressing harder against her ribs. Where did he go when he left? Did someone expect him home? Was there even a home? She thought about asking, more than once. Her lips would part as she cleared his plate, her voice nearly ready to cross that invisible line. But every time she caught herself. Because the way he looked at her, not with fear, but with something like fragile trust, warned her not to go too far. Not yet. She'd seen enough broken people to know. Questions can feel like fingers prying open wounds. And this boy, he carried enough invisible bruises already. That night, as she sat alone in her small apartment, a lukewarm cup of tea in her hands, Jenny thought about the boy more than she meant to. She thought about how carefully he moved, how quiet he made himself, how hunger seemed to shape his very posture. It was hard not to care, but it was even harder not to wonder. She didn't know his name, but his absence now would feel louder than most people's presence, and that scared her more than she expected. In the cramped back room behind the kitchen, where the walls smelled like onions and the break table wobbled no matter how many napkins were stuffed under its leg, Jenny stood rinsing her hands when she felt the weight of a gaze. Kathy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyebrows already halfway raised. "You feeding that kid again?" she asked. No judgment yet, just curiosity laced with something heavier. Jenny dried her hands slowly. Just using what would have been thrown out. Kathy didn't move. You know how these things go. You start with breakfast, next thing you know, his buddies show up expecting lunch and dessert. That's how it starts. Jenny didn't flinch. He's not asking for anything. Not yet. Later that day, Harold made a passing comment while folding his newspaper. "That boy, your new project." He smirked into his coffee cup, but the tone wasn't playful. "Seems to me, people don't go around handing out free meals unless they want something back." Jenny didn't answer. She topped off his mug, moved on like she hadn't heard. But the whispering started to build. Sarah, the new hostess, mentioned it while restocking menus. "It's sweet and all, but do you even know where he lives? Like, what if this turns into something we get blamed for?" Jenny folded a napkin in half, then in half again. "He eats, then he leaves." Sarah shrugged. "Just saying, people notice things." That was the problem. People were starting to notice. Jenny had spent most of her life flying under the radar, blending into shifts, keeping her head down. But the boy had disrupted that. Not loudly, just enough. Just visible enough to stir up opinions. Even Mark, the manager, began watching her a little more closely. His glances weren't cruel, just cautious, the kind of concern that came from someone more worried about bottom lines than breakfast plates. Still, she didn't stop. Every morning, the boy walked in. Every morning, she placed a plate in front of him with the same soft, practiced grace. And every morning, his eyes held that quiet flicker of trust, shaky, fragile, but real. She didn't feed him to be noticed. She didn't do it to fix anything. She did it because hunger recognized hunger. Because the weight of not asking questions sometimes said more than all the answers people thought they deserved. Let them talk, she thought. Let them doubt. Some things were worth doing anyway. The conversation happened behind a half-closed door, but Jenny could hear the tension before she saw it. Mark's voice, low but firm, called her in between breakfast rushes. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the narrow office that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old receipts. Mark didn't look up right away. He was flipping through order slips like they might change the conversation. When he finally met her eyes, there was no anger, just the weary expression of someone who hated confrontation almost as much as he hated his profit margins shrinking. "I've been watching," he started, fingers tapping the desk. "The kid. The food." Jenny said nothing. Mark sighed. "I get it, Jen. You've got a good heart. But this isn't a shelter. You can't keep handing out free meals. We're not in the business of feeding strays." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. "I'll pay for them. Every plate." Mark blinked. "Out of your tips? Jen, that barely—" "It's my choice," she said quickly, steady. "One meal a day. I can manage." He leaned back, eyes scanning her face like he was trying to measure how far she'd go. "Look, it's not just about money. It's about precedent. Customers talk, staff talks. Next thing you know, everyone's doing their own version of charity, and we've got half the town eating for free." Jenny crossed her arms, apron wrinkling beneath them. "He doesn't ask for anything. He just shows up. Quiet, polite. I've seen people do a lot worse for a lot less." Mark studied her for a long beat, then exhaled through his nose. "Fine. But if it starts affecting your tables, or stirring up real trouble, it ends. Understood?" She nodded once. Understood. As she stepped out of the office and back into the warmth of the diner, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She wouldn't be fired. Not today. And more importantly, tomorrow morning, that booth in the corner would still have a plate waiting. Later, as she counted out her tips and slid a few crumpled bills into an envelope marked extra, she thought of all the meals she had skipped growing up, all the times someone looking the other way had been the difference between hunger and hope. It wasn't about rules. It was about doing the right thing when no one else would. And for now, that was enough. The morning felt sharper than usual, the kind of cold that clung to your lungs and made the floor feel colder through your shoes. Jenny tugged her sleeves down as she unlocked the diner door, the key sticking just slightly in the frozen lock. She flicked on the lights, started the coffee pot, cracked the window near the grill for Kathy. Everything as it always was. At 7:10, she placed the plate on the warmer. Pancakes today, golden and soft, butter melting just so, a drizzle of syrup pooled to one side. His usual. She added the glass of water, 2 napkins folded neatly, and brought it to the corner booth at 7:14. Early, but that felt right. The booth looked strange without him. The bell over the door chimed twice between 7:15 and 7:20, but neither time was him. Jenny wiped the same section of counter twice, glancing up every few seconds. The minutes crawled. The pancakes cooled. The plate sat untouched. By 7:30, she'd stopped pretending to be busy. At 7:45, she poured herself a coffee she didn't drink. When 7:55 passed and the door hadn't opened, Jenny walked to the booth and stood there a moment. The food looked out of place, like it didn't belong without him. Kathy caught her eye from behind the grill. "Late?" "Maybe," Jenny said, though she didn't believe it. By 8:10, the edges of the pancakes had begun to dry out. Jenny picked up the plate, walked it back to the kitchen, and slid it into a takeout box. She didn't throw it away. The boy didn't come the next day either, or the day after that. She still brought out the plate each morning, eggs or toast or oatmeal depending on the weather, but the booth remained empty. The food always went cold. By the 5th day, even Harold noticed. "No book boy this week?" he asked over his usual black coffee. Jenny just shook her head. "Guess not." She said nothing about the ache that had settled in her chest, or how she caught herself glancing at the door every few minutes. She didn't mention the strange heaviness in the booth's emptiness, or how it had begun to feel personal, like something had been left unfinished. By the end of the week, she stopped setting the table. But she didn't stop looking. It started with a chuckle at the counter. A man in a pressed blazer, sipping his coffee while scrolling through his phone, held it up to Jenny as she refilled his cup. "Look familiar?" he asked, half grinning. On the screen was a photo of the corner booth, the boys' booth, now empty, a plate of untouched food sitting neatly in front of it. The caption read, "Rosie's Diner, where food is wasted on invisible friends. Charity gone wrong." Jenny stared at it for a second too long. "That you?" the man asked, still smiling like it was a harmless joke. She didn't answer, just nodded once and walked away, heart pounding. The sound of laughter followed her to the kitchen. By noon, the post had spread. A local Facebook group had picked it up. The comments came fast, cruel in their certainty. Probably a PR stunt. "This is what happens when people feed strays. Don't act shocked when they vanish. Someone tell that waitress real life isn't a Hallmark movie." Kathy saw it too. She didn't say anything at first, just handed Jenny a plate with more force than usual. But later, in the back near the freezer, she finally spoke. "People talk, Jen. You knew they would." Jenny leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly over her apron. "I didn't do it for them." "Doesn't matter. You made the booth a story. Now they're telling it their way." Jenny didn't argue. There was no defense to make. Not when strangers could reduce a quiet act of care into spectacle. Not when people were more interested in laughing than understanding. That night, in her apartment above the pharmacy, she scrolled through the comments longer than she should have. Each line felt like a pebble dropped in a still pond, small but impossible to ignore. Hope she's not getting paid for playing charity. If you ask me, that kid never existed. She closed the app and set the phone down, staring at the empty chair across from her kitchen table. The takeout box from that morning, still uneaten, sat on the counter, untouched like the booth. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat in the silence, remembering the quiet nods, the soft thank yous, the way the boy's eyes had slowly begun to meet hers. They hadn't seen him, but she had. And she wasn't going to let the noise drown out what she knew was real. The cold crept in through the cracks of the apartment windows that night, but Jenny hardly noticed. She sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, an open box beside her, filled with the fragments of a life that had grown quieter with time. At the bottom, beneath old postcards and a service medal dulled by age, she found what she was looking for. A small, leather-bound journal, edges frayed, its pages softened by years of turning. Her father's handwriting greeted her on the first page, neat and deliberate. He'd carried the journal during his years as an army medic. It had followed him through deserts and dust storms, through nights spent under stars and days spent tending to wounds that left more than scars. Jenny flipped through entries she knew by heart. Some were about rations and routes, others about the men in his unit, how they joked between shellings, how they held each other up when no one else could. Then she found the one. The dog-eared page she'd read a dozen times, but that now felt different. He'd written about a boy, just a kid, who had wandered near the camp, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes too old for his age. Her father had given him half his meal, nothing official. No one ordered him to do it. One of the other soldiers had warned him not to, said the kid could be a scout, a threat. Her father had written, "Maybe he will be," but he looked hungry and scared. Same as me when Mom used to save me the last piece of bread. No one grows poor by sharing half a loaf. But those who forget to share, they stay hungry in ways they never understand. Jenny's fingers lingered on that line. She imagined him writing it late at night, lit by a lantern in the dirt, thinking of home, of her, of what mattered when all the noise fell away. Outside, a gust rattled the window pane. The town below lay still, unaware of her quiet resolve hardening in the dark. She closed the journal and held it close, the weight of it grounding her. The boy hadn't come back. People had mocked her. Management had warned her. But none of that mattered as much as remembering what her father had taught her without ever needing to say it aloud. Compassion wasn't a performance. It was a choice. One you made again and again, especially when no one else would. The plate always went to the same booth. Pancakes on Monday, scrambled eggs on Tuesday, oatmeal with a sprinkle of cinnamon on colder days. Jenny set them down like she used to when he was there. Quiet, casual, like nothing had changed. But he wasn't there. Each morning she walked the 3 blocks to Rosie's, stepped into the warm light of the diner, and prepared his plate with the same quiet precision. The seat stayed empty. The bell never chimed for him. Still, she brought out the meal. Every day. The comments hadn't stopped. They came in murmurs from across the counter, half-heard snickers from customers who thought kindness made her naive. A couple of teens came in one morning and asked if the ghost kid would be joining her again. Kathy had to bite her tongue to keep from throwing them out. Online, the post hadn't gone away. Someone had added a new comment. Still serving plates to thin air. Bless her heart. The kind of cruelty wrapped in fake concern that stung more than outright meanness. Jenny read it once, then deleted the app. She didn't respond to any of it. Not in words. She responded with warm plates and clean napkins, with a full glass of water and a folded note tucked quietly into her own tip jar labeled extra. A simple act in defiance of the noise. Each time she placed the food at that booth, she thought of the boy, not just his small frame or silent thank yous, but what he had carried in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or the weight of having to act older than he was. Hunger, yes, but not just the kind food could solve. So she kept setting the meal, not out of habit, not out of guilt, but because belief is its own kind of protest. And she believed that maybe he'd return, or that even if he didn't, someone else would need that booth, that plate, that moment of being seen. Hope, she had learned, didn't always shout. Sometimes it simply showed up anyway, placed a plate down on a cold morning, and waited. Even in absence, Jenny chose to serve. Because maybe, just maybe, someone out there still needed to be fed. It was a Thursday morning, the kind that started gray and stayed that way. The diner was half full, the scent of bacon heavy in the air, the usual clatter of plates, and low conversation humming along like background music. Jenny moved from booth to counter and back again, a quiet rhythm she could do with her eyes closed. The corner booth sat empty, as it had for weeks. But she still glanced at it, still waited. At exactly 9:17, the world outside shifted. The rumble came first, deep, steady, unfamiliar. A customer near the window leaned forward, then stood, coffee forgotten. Jenny followed his gaze. 4 black SUVs rolled into the lot, sleek and spotless despite the slush. They didn't park so much as arrange themselves, tight and purposeful, blocking half the street without apology. Each had government plates, the kind that didn't need explaining. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. Even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to lower its hum. Doors opened in perfect unison. Men in uniform stepped out, tall, composed, every move deliberate. From the lead vehicle emerged a figure who stood out even among them. Dress blues, medals that caught the dull light, a face marked by years of sun, wind, and decisions most people would never understand. He scanned the building, then started toward the diner with 2 officers flanking him. His boots crunched the salted walkway as the bell above the door gave a thin, stunned chime. Mark stepped from the back office, suddenly smoothing down his tie, caught halfway through a half-eaten donut. Can I help you, sir?" The man removed his cap. His voice was low but carried, cutting clean through the silence. "I'm looking for someone who works here, a woman named Jenny Millers." Every head turned. Jenny stood frozen behind the counter, one hand still wrapped around a coffee pot. The words felt too large for the room. "I'm Jenny," she said, her voice quiet but steady. The officer's face softened just slightly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a crisp envelope. "My name is Colonel David Reeves, U.S. Army Special Forces. I have a message and a letter." He stepped closer, extending the envelope with careful reverence. "It's from the commanding general, and from the father of a boy named Adam." Jenny felt the floor tilt beneath her, though her feet hadn't moved. The diner was silent. Not out of respect, but because no one knew what this was yet. Only that something had shifted. And Jenny, heart pounding, already knew this moment wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything that would follow. The bell above the door chimed again, louder somehow, even though it was no different than it had been every other morning. Jenny looked up from behind the counter, just as the tall man in a military dress uniform stepped inside. The room, which had been buzzing only moments before, fell quiet in an instant. Forks hovered mid-air. Coffee mugs were lowered slowly. No one spoke. He scanned the diner with practiced precision, his gaze pausing on faces, measuring, calculating. Then it stopped. On her. Mark appeared from the back hallway, wiping his hands on a towel that suddenly seemed too dirty for the moment. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his voice stiffer than usual. The officer nodded once. "I'm looking for a waitress here. Jenny Millers." A beat of silence. Then every pair of eyes in the diner shifted to her at once. Jenny's heart thudded against her ribs, but she stepped forward without hesitating. Her apron still clutched at the waist, coffee-stained order pad in one hand. She took a quiet breath. "I'm Jenny," she said. The officer's expression softened, just slightly, enough to show there was something behind all that formality, something human. He reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, crisp and official-looking. "My name is Colonel David Reeves. I'm with U.S. Army Special Forces. I've been asked to deliver this personally." He held the envelope out with both hands. The diner was still silent. Someone's phone buzzed on a table and was quickly silenced. Even the fryer in the back seemed to hush. Jenny stepped forward and took the envelope carefully. Her hands didn't shake, not yet, but she could feel the weight of every stare, every unspoken question pressing in around her. "There's a letter inside," Colonel Reeves said gently. "From the father of a boy named Adam, and a message of thanks from all of us." Jenny blinked, the name catching somewhere between her ears and her chest. Adam, the boy, the booth in the corner. The colonel gave her a small nod, as if confirming what she hadn't yet said aloud. "Yes," he said, "that Adam." Jenny didn't speak. She couldn't yet. But the envelope trembled slightly now, just enough to betray what her voice wouldn't. Mark stepped back, stunned into stillness. The rest of the diner followed. And Jenny, who had asked for nothing, who had fed a child with no name and no explanation, now stood at the center of a moment that felt far too big to carry. They had come for her. And the story everyone thought they knew was only beginning to unfold. Colonel Reeves waited a moment, letting the room absorb the weight of what he was about to say. Then he spoke, not like a man delivering orders, but like someone honoring a promise. "Adam Thompson," he said, "the boy who came here every morning, was the son of Master Sergeant James Thompson, U.S. Army Special Forces." Jenny felt the name wrap around her, unfamiliar and yet deeply known. Adam. She hadn't asked, hadn't needed to. But now that it had a shape, a full name, it felt heavier, more real than she could have imagined. The colonel continued, his voice low but steady. "Sergeant Thompson was deployed overseas on a classified operation. He entrusted his son to his wife while he was gone. But shortly after he left, she abandoned the boy. No note, no explanation. Just gone." A ripple of stunned silence passed through the diner. Chairs creaked, silverware clinked faintly, but no one interrupted. "Adam didn't tell anyone," the colonel said. "Didn't want to be taken away, didn't want to risk losing the last piece of his father he had left. So he stayed, alone. He used what little money his father had saved for emergencies. He walked to school, found ways to stretch a few dollars into meals, but it wasn't enough." Jenny's breath caught. Her hands gripped the envelope tighter, fingers pressing into the paper like it might steady her. "He came here," Reeves went on, "to this diner, sat in that booth, and you fed him." His gaze met hers, not as a stranger, as a witness. "You didn't ask who he was. You didn't ask why he was alone. You just gave him food, warmth, a place to feel human." Jenny couldn't speak. The truth had unraveled slowly, across weeks and pancakes, but hearing it now, spoken aloud for all to hear, made her chest ache with something bigger than grief, something like honor, something like loss. The colonel reached into his pocket again and pulled out a folded letter. In his final correspondence, Sergeant Thompson wrote one request. If anything happened to him, we were to find the woman who fed his son, the woman who asked nothing, but gave everything. Jenny took the letter, hands shaking. "He wanted you to know," Reeves said, his voice softer now, "that you didn't just feed a hungry boy, you preserved the dignity of a soldier's child." Tears burned behind her eyes. The booth, the boy, the book, the thank yous, it all circled back with crushing clarity. Adam had never been just a hungry kid. He was a soldier's son, carrying the weight of silence, survival, and a father's hope. And Jenny, without knowing, had carried it with him. Colonel Reeves stood a little taller as the silence in the diner thickened. He looked around at the stunned faces, then back to Jenny, who still hadn't sat down, her hands clenched tightly around the letter. "What Sergeant Thompson didn't know," the colonel said carefully, "was what happened after he deployed. His wife, Adam's mother, left. No warning, no forwarding address. Just gone." Jenny's heart sank. It was the kind of abandonment you didn't talk about, the kind that left invisible bruises. She thought of Adam, the quiet way he moved, the stillness in his body, the way he seemed to shrink into the corners of the diner as if afraid to take up space. It made a kind of awful sense now. He didn't tell anyone, Reeves continued. Not the school, not neighbors. We didn't know either. He was scared that if someone found out, they'd take him away. So he survived on his own. For months. The weight of those words settled on the booth in the corner like a shadow. Jenny remembered how thin he'd looked, how quickly he ate, how he never once asked for help. He hadn't wanted pity. He hadn't wanted questions. He'd wanted to hold on to whatever was left of his father, his home, his world. He lived off his father's emergency fund, the colonel said. Stretched it further than any kid should have had to. No electricity some nights, skipped meals. He was holding on for his dad, hoping he'd come home before anyone found out. Jenny's throat tightened. She thought of the mornings he'd walked through the diner's door, book in hand, eyes down. The quiet, the routine, the way he always thanked her like it hurt to speak. He hadn't just been hungry. He'd been alone. He never told you who he was, the colonel said. But he told us about you. When we finally found him, after the funeral, he talked about the woman at the diner who made him feel safe, who didn't ask questions. Jenny blinked hard. The room blurred for a moment. I didn't know, she whispered. You didn't have to, Reeves replied. You saw what mattered. Jenny looked at the letter in her hand, then toward the booth that had remained empty for so long. Now, it felt full, not just with memory, but with meaning. Everything she'd done without knowing had carried him through a darkness no child should have walked alone. And in that silence, truth finally had a name. Adam, not just a boy with a book, but a son, a survivor. And now, a story being told. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, thin paper wrapped in something sacred. Jenny held it like it might break, fingers trembling as she gently unfolded the handwritten letter inside. The ink had faded slightly, the penmanship neat but rushed, as if it had been written in a moment that mattered more than time could measure. Colonel Reeves spoke softly while she read, filling in what the letter didn't say aloud. Sergeant Thompson wrote this on the last night before his unit moved out. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew the risks. He gave us instructions to deliver it if he didn't make it home. Jenny's eyes scanned the page, heart tightening with every line. To the woman at the diner. I don't know your name. My son just calls you the lady with the warm food. He told me about you in his letters, the ones I read over and over when the world out here got too loud. He said you never asked why he came alone. You never treated him like a problem to fix. Just gave him breakfast. Just smiled. That's more than most do. I want you to know, when a man's at war, he worries. Not just about the bullets or the orders. He worries about home, about what he's leaving behind. I thought I'd left Adam in safe hands, but life had other plans. I failed to protect him the way I should have. But then you showed up. Without knowing it, you became part of his safety net. You held him up when I couldn't. You reminded him quietly that the world still had kindness in it. You fed my boy when no one else knew he was starving. Jenny paused, her throat tight. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. And I hate that. But I find peace knowing that during those long mornings, before school, before the noise, you were there. You gave him something I couldn't from where I was. Not just food, dignity, comfort, human decency. You didn't have to, but you did. And for that, from the deepest place in my heart, I thank you. Master Sergeant James Thompson, U.S. Army Special Forces. Jenny didn't realize her hands were shaking until she saw the letter tremble. Around her, the diner remained hushed, the kind of quiet that carried reverence. She folded the letter carefully, holding it close, not like a souvenir, like a promise. What she had done, small as it had felt in the moment, had rippled across oceans, across lives. And now, even in absence, it had returned, not in glory, but in gratitude. The letter rested gently in Jenny's hands, her fingers still curled around its edges like it might vanish if she let go. The words echoed in her head. Thank you for feeding my son, for giving him dignity, for being there when I couldn't. The kind of thank you most people never hear in their lifetime. She looked up slowly, her eyes meeting Colonel Reeves's. There was nothing performative in his expression, just something solid, respectful, unshakable. A silence passed between them, the kind not meant to be broken. Then, with solemn precision, the colonel stepped back, heels together. He raised his hand in a crisp, deliberate salute. It took Jenny a second to understand. This was no casual gesture, no friendly nod. This was protocol reserved for ceremony, for honor, for those who had given something extraordinary, for soldiers. And yet, it was for her. A hush fell over the diner like a blanket. Forks stopped midair, coffee cooled untouched. Even the fluorescent hum overhead seemed to dim. Jenny stood still, unsure if she should move or speak, but every instinct told her, don't. Behind Colonel Reeves, the two officers flanking him followed suit. Then, through the windows, she saw them, the others, still outside, lined beside the SUVs. Each one stood at attention, each one saluted in perfect, reverent silence. Inside, no one dared to speak. Even the regulars, the ones who had doubted, who had whispered, who had laughed at the empty booth, sat frozen in place. Some stared at their plates, others at Jenny. A few lowered their heads. It wasn't about pancakes anymore, or free meals, or rumors. It was about a child who had been hungry and a woman who had noticed, who had cared enough to feed him without needing to know why. And now, in front of the very people who understood sacrifice better than anyone, that act was being honored in the highest way they knew. Jenny blinked back the sting in her eyes. Her voice wouldn't come. But she nodded, just once, eyes locked on the colonel. He held the salute a second longer, then lowered his hand with the kind of grace that only comes from experience. The others followed. The spell broke gently, like snow slipping from a tree. People began to breathe again, but nothing felt the same. For the first time in her quiet, ordinary life, Jenny Miller stood in the center of something unforgettable. Not because she'd asked for recognition, but because she had given without asking for anything in return. The story didn't just stay in the diner. By the next morning, a local reporter had caught wind of what happened. A quiet post, no clickbait, no drama, just a photo of Jenny holding the folded letter, eyes wide with disbelief. Waitress received salute from U.S. Special Forces for feeding a boy in need. It spread faster than anyone expected. The story was picked up by the state paper, then national blogs, then morning shows. News anchors spoke her name like it was stitched with reverence. Strangers tagged her in posts, calling her a hero. Headlines used words like selfless, angel, humble. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages she never expected and didn't know how to respond to. People started showing up, not just for pancakes, but to sit in the booth, to say thank you. Some came quietly, leaving envelopes with cash for the diner. Others came with stories. A mother whose son had just deployed, a man who remembered being that boy once, alone, cold, and seen by someone who didn't look away. Mark printed out the article and taped it near the register. Kathy added a photo of the military convoy to the bulletin board behind the counter, right next to the old Employee of the Month plaque that no one paid attention to before. Tips tripled. Customers waited for Jenny's section even when the line curled out the door. One woman handed Jenny a folded card with tears in her eyes and said, "My son made it home, but I hope someone like you would have been there if he hadn't." The same Facebook group that once mocked her posted a full apology and pinned the original photo with a new caption. "Turns out heroes wear aprons." Thousands shared it. Hundreds commented. Not with cruelty this time, but gratitude, recognition, respect. Jenny didn't let it change her routine. She still arrived at dawn, still tied the same faded apron around her waist, still filled water glasses before customers asked. But now there was a plaque above the corner booth. Small, simple, etched in brass, reserved in honor of quiet kindness. And every so often, someone would sit there, alone, quiet, watching. And Jenny would set down a plate, warm, full, no questions asked. Because long before the world knew her name, she had known what it meant to be invisible. And long after the headlines faded, she would remember what it meant to be seen. The next morning, the diner felt different. The same bell above the door chimed, the same coffee brewed in the same pot. But something had shifted. It wasn't the kind of change you could see. It was the kind you felt, like a page had turned and everyone was suddenly reading a new story. Jenny arrived early, like always. She swept the floor, refilled the sugar jars, lined the menus just so. The booth in the corner gleamed beneath the morning light, its brass plaque catching the sun, reserved in honor of quiet kindness. Mark came in around 7, unusually quiet. He carried a clipboard but didn't look at it. He just stood near the front window for a moment, staring out at Main Street like he was expecting something. When Jenny passed by with a tray, he spoke. "I was wrong." She paused. "About what?" He nodded toward the plaque, toward the booth that had become more than just a seat. "About what matters?" Jenny didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that day, after the lunch rush settled, Mark taped something new in the window. Customers noticed it immediately, a clean white sign with bold black lettering. No logos, no marketing spin, just a quiet promise. Whoever you are, whatever you can pay. No one leaves hungry. Jenny read it once, then again. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it said everything. Word spread quickly, the way good things sometimes do. By the end of the week, veterans on cross-country drives made detours to visit. Families with tight wallets came in with tired eyes and left with full bellies, and thank yous whispered through tears. No one asked questions. No one needed to. The regulars noticed too. Harold started leaving an extra 5 under his saucer every morning. A mother with 3 kids slipped a 20 into the tip jar and mouthed for someone else. People who once doubted now nodded with quiet respect when they passed Jenny's station. The policy didn't fix everything, but it reminded people of something that had been easy to forget. Food was about more than eating. It was about dignity. It was about being seen. Mark never made a big deal about it. When a reporter asked for an interview, he simply said, "Sometimes people just need to be fed." And in that little diner, tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat, a new kind of warmth settled in. The kind that didn't fade with the seasons. The kind that meant nobody, ever again, would sit hungry in silence. The envelope arrived quietly one afternoon, tucked between a stack of menus and a pile of utility bills. Jenny almost missed it. No return address, just her name written in neat, careful handwriting across the front. She opened it slowly, fingers brushing the edges of the paper, like it was something sacred. Inside was a letter, written in pencil on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was uneven, but deliberate, every word pressed with the kind of attention only a child trying very hard to be taken seriously would give. Dear Miss Jenny, I didn't know your name until the day the Colonel came, but I knew your smile. I knew the way you always brought pancakes when you didn't have to, the way you never asked questions when I couldn't give answers. I wanted to tell you thank you in person, but I didn't know how. And then everything changed. My grandparents are nice. They live in Colorado. Grandma bakes cookies, and Grandpa teaches me to fish. They even got me a new backpack. But I still miss the corner booth. I miss your pancakes. I miss the place where I didn't feel so invisible. Jenny sat down on the edge of the break room bench, eyes scanning the next line more slowly now. My dad used to say, real heroes don't need to be loud. He said sometimes they wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons. I think he was talking about you, even if he didn't know it yet. She paused. Her throat tightened. Thank you for not making me explain, for giving me food when I didn't know how to ask for it, for making me feel like I existed, even just for a little while. That booth will always feel like the first place I was safe after everything went wrong. Your friend, Adam Thompson. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending. I hope yours does too. Jenny folded the letter carefully, the edges already soft from her hands. She didn't need the cameras or the comments, or even the praise that had come since. This letter, simple, honest, and written in pencil, meant more than any of it. Later that day, she pinned it behind the counter, just below the Special Forces coin. Not in a frame, not under glass, just where she could see it. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things, a plate of food, a quiet seat, a smile with no questions, could become a lifeline. And sometimes they were remembered forever. It started with a small patch, round, frayed at the edges, with the emblem of a Special Forces unit stitched in black and gold. Jenny found it one morning tucked beside the sugar jar at the corner booth. No note, no name. Just the patch, left behind like a quiet thank you. She pinned it to the corkboard behind the counter. A few days later, a coin arrived. Heavy, polished, the kind commanders gave to soldiers for acts of distinction. It was placed carefully atop the booth's napkin dispenser. Again, no name. But Jenny recognized the gesture. It wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to be felt. Soon after, they started showing up. Men and women in uniform. Some active duty, others clearly long retired. Some stopped for coffee. Others sat in silence, staring out the window like they were waiting for something only they could name. Most of them asked to sit in that booth. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. One man, broad-shouldered and quiet, left behind a folded flag pin. Another woman, her hands scarred and eyes sharp with memory, left a photograph, 2 children holding a sign that read, "Welcome home, Daddy." Kathy made space on the bulletin board without asking. Mark added a small glass case near the register. What began as a handful of tokens grew into a quiet mosaic: coins, ribbons, old dog tags, letters written in all caps from bases halfway around the world. Every piece left without ceremony, just reverence. They called it the Wall of Thanks. But Jenny never gave it a name. She just dusted it once a week and made sure the stories behind the tokens stayed safe. Not told loudly, not turned into spectacle, just remembered. A young soldier came in one morning, barely 20, eyes still too young for the uniform he wore. He ordered waffles and coffee, then hesitated before paying. "Is it true," he asked, voice low, "that she fed him every day?" Jenny only smiled. He never left hungry. The soldier nodded, left a coin with a lightning bolt emblem, and said nothing else. By the end of the month, the case behind the counter was nearly full. Kindness, it turned out, left echoes. And Rosie's diner had become more than a place for eggs and toast. It had become a resting spot for gratitude. A quiet sanctuary where the people who served, and the people who remembered them, could sit for a while, breathe easy, and feel seen. The morning light filtered through the diner windows, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the tile floor. A breeze moved the edge of Jenny's apron as she unlocked the door, just like she had done nearly every day for the past year. The bell above the entrance gave its familiar chime, and the warmth of Rosie's wrapped around her like an old friend. Everything looked the same. The counter lined with coffee cups, the corner booth gleaming in its quiet corner, the brass plaque catching the light, reserved in honor of quiet kindness. The bulletin board behind the register had grown crowded with tokens, unit patches, letters, photos, a folded flag pin, all left by visitors who didn't need to say much. Jenny moved behind the counter and began her routine. She grabbed her order pad, slid it into her apron pocket, then paused. There, resting neatly on the counter by her station, was a coin. Not just any coin, but a Special Forces Challenge coin, sleek, heavy, engraved with an insignia and 2 Latin words, Semper Memor, always remembering. She looked around, but the diner was empty. No footsteps, no notes, just the coin, placed with quiet intention. Her fingers curled around it. The weight was familiar now, not just metal, but memory. A small noise behind her made her turn. Mark was by the front window, taping something up. She walked over, still holding the coin. It was a new sign. Simple black letters on a clean white sheet, facing outward toward the street. No one leaves hungry. She looked at him. He just shrugged like it was nothing. Figured it was time, he said, not meeting her eyes. Besides, feels like that's what this place has been about all along. Jenny smiled, but it wasn't the kind that faded. It settled in deep, warming something she hadn't realized still needed healing. Outside, the town moved through its morning, people walking dogs, kids heading to school, the mailman waving as he passed. But inside the diner, something had changed, quietly and permanently. Jenny slipped the coin into the pocket of her apron. Its weight grounded her, reminded her that kindness wasn't a moment. It was a legacy. She turned on the coffee machine, flipped over a mug, and got ready for the first customer of the day. Somewhere in Colorado, a boy named Adam was probably finishing breakfast with his grandparents. And here, in the corner of a small-town diner, a seat still waited, just in case someone needed it.